Welcome to part 9 of our lecture series on sustainable finance. My name is Gregor Weiss, and I am a professor of finance here at Leipzig University. In the last chapter, we asked whether sustainable investing works in principle, the theory and the evidence. Now we get practical and follow the money into the industry that actually runs it, sustainable asset management. These are the firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, Amundi, DWS, and the rest, that take other people's savings and invest them, increasingly with an ESG label attached. It's a multi-trillion-dollar business, and it sits at the very center of the sustainable finance story. But as we'll see, it's also where the gap between marketing and substance is at its widest, which makes it a fascinating and slightly uncomfortable topic. To place us, this is topic 9 of 12, and it's the natural sequel to part 8. In part 8, we studied sustainable investing as a set of ideas. And strategies. In part 9, we study the institutions that deliver those strategies: the asset managers, the funds, the labels, the index providers, the stewardship teams. If part 8 was the what and why, part 9 is the who and how well. And a lot of what we learned last time, additionality, engagement versus divestment, the greenium, rating divergence, comes straight back, now embodied in real firms making real decisions with your pension. Here's what you should take away from this chapter. First, understand how asset managers actually integrate ESG and the agency chain that runs from savers through managers to firms. Second, know the products and labels, the European Union's SFDR categories, the ESMA fund naming rules, and the role of index providers and stewardship. Third, critically assess the evidence. Do ESG funds perform? Do they deliver real impact, or do they mostly greenwash? And fourth, understand the regulatory backdrop, including the striking anti-ESG backlash now underway in the United States. That last point matters, because for the first time in this course, we'll see sustainable finance not just advancing, but being actively pushed back. 3 questions guide us. First, what does it actually mean to do ESG as an asset manager? What changes in the daily work? Second, do sustainable funds deliver returns, and do they deliver real-world impact? And third, where exactly is the line between genuine sustainable investing and greenwashing? Keep that third question front of mind. This chapter contains some of the most pointed academic evidence in the whole course, studies that put real numbers on how often the ESG label is more marketing than substance. Let's begin with part A, the sustainable asset management industry itself. Before we judge whether it works, we need to understand what these firms do, how the money flows through them, and how big and concentrated the business really is. And the single most important idea to grasp first is the peculiar chain of delegation at the heart of it all. Start with the basics. Asset management is simply investing money on behalf of clients, savers, pension funds, insurers, in exchange for a fee. The manager doesn't own the money, they steward it for others. Sustainable asset management adds a layer. It integrates ESG into the investment process and offers ESG-branded products. Now recall the 2 motives from part 8, because they carry straight over. There's the financial motive, treating ESG as information about risk and return. And there's the non-pecuniary motive, as information about risk and return. And there's the non-pecuniary motive, values and impact, where clients want their money to reflect their principles. Here's the crucial complication that runs through this entire chapter. The manager is an agent, acting for someone else. And that immediately raises a deep question. Whose preferences are actually being served? When a fund manager tilts a portfolio toward green stocks, are they doing it because their clients want it, because it makes money, or because sustainable sells and gathers assets? Often it's genuinely hard to tell, and that ambiguity is where a lot of the trouble in this industry begins. Let me sharpen why this whose preferences question is so thorny. A manager's legal duty is to act in the client's best financial interest. So if a client simply hands over money and says, grow it, can the manager impose its own values? say refusing to hold oil, even if that might cost a little return? Or must it stick strictly to maximizing money? And what if different clients in the same pooled fund want different things? One wants maximum return, another wants no fossil fuels at all. The manager can't serve both perfectly. This is not a hypothetical. It sits at the heart of the fiduciary duty debates we'll reach in Part D, and it explains why the same act, tilting a fund green, can be praised as prudent risk management in Europe and attacked as a breach of duty, or woke activism in parts of the United States. The agent acting for others is always vulnerable to the charge that it's really serving itself or its own politics or simply whatever gathers the most assets. Let's make that chain explicit because it's the backbone of the whole chapter. Picture three links. At one end sit the asset owners, savers, pension funds, insurers, university endowments. They hold the ultimate capital and they set the mandate, the instructions about what the money is for. In the middle sit the asset managers, the BlackRocks, Vanguards, Amundis, and DWSs of the world. They take that mandate, invest the money, and vote the shares. And at the far end sit the portfolio firms, the actual companies where any real-world ESG impact ultimately has to happen. Now notice that there are two separate agency relationships here, stacked on top of each other. Agency 1, the owners delegate to the managers and have to trust that managers act on their behalf. Agency 2, the managers steward the firms and have to be trusted to push those companies in the right direction. This is what we call the double agency problem, and it's why sustainable asset management is so hard to get right. At each handover, information is lost and incentives can misalign. The saver who wants a greener world is 2 full steps removed from the boardroom where change actually happens. And at every step, someone else's interests can quietly take over. And here's why this structure explains so much of what follows. Think about where the incentives really point. The saver wants impact, but has almost no visibility into what the manager does. The manager is paid a fee on assets gathered, so its strongest incentive is to attract money, which means marketing sustainability persuasively, whether or not it delivers. And the portfolio firm just wants cheap capital and a quiet life. Notice that nobody in this chain has both the incentive and the power to make sustainability real. The person who wants it has no power. The person with the power is paid to gather assets, not to change the world. Keep this diagram in your head because almost every troubling finding in this chapter, the greenwashing studies, the weak stewardship, the gap between labels and substance, is really just this double agency problem playing out. When you understand the chain, the failures stop being surprising and start being predictable. So how big is this industry? Let me give you 3 numbers from Morningstar's fund flow data. First, global sustainable fund assets stood at about $3.2 trillion at the end of 2024, an all-time high. Second, that's more than 4 times the level of 2018, so this has been a decade of explosive growth. And third, a remarkable concentration. Around 84% of those assets are domiciled in Europe. Just sit with that last figure for a moment. Sustainable asset management is overwhelmingly a European phenomenon. The United States, despite being by far the largest asset management market overall, holds only a small slice of the sustainable fund assets. And as we'll see, that slice has been shrinking. But notice the word in the slide title, stalling. The explosive growth is over. After a peak around 2021, flows have flattened and in the United States reversed. So we're studying an industry at an inflection point, no longer in its boom and facing serious headwinds. That makes the honest questions about performance and impact more pressing than ever. And why is the market so overwhelmingly European? A few reasons worth knowing. Europe moved first and hardest on regulation. The disclosure rules and labels we'll discuss actually created the category and forced funds to declare themselves. European savers and pension systems have been more receptive. And bluntly, sustainability is less politically contested in Europe than in the United States, where, as we'll see, it has become a genuine culture war flashpoint. So this 84% figure isn't an accident. It's the fingerprint of regulation and politics on the shape of a market. Where the rules pushed, the money followed, and where the politics turned hostile, it retreated. Let's recap this opening video. Sustainable asset management is the business of investing other people's money with an ESG layer for a fee. Its defining feature is a double agency chain, savers delegate to managers who steward firms. And at each link, whose preferences really count becomes murky. The market is large, about $3.2 trillion, but heavily concentrated in Europe and now stalling after its post-2021 peak. In the next video, we look at who actually controls this money, the astonishing concentration in the big three universal owners, and at the menu of ESG strategies managers deploy. See you there. Thanks for watching.